Hey, thanks for joining us for this episode. I do hope that if you haven't yet, you will subscribe to our YouTube channel, that you'll follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you may listen to podcasts. Well, this episode, I am following up a little bit with the last one where we talked about new products, software that was announced at Apple's WWDC last week. Well, today we're going to follow up focusing in on the Mac conversation in particular, because from time to time, I like to update you on what might be the best Mac computer for you to purchase if you're in the market for one. And, you know, a time of release, it's summer, you know, there might be some students out there maybe gearing up for college or school, or maybe it's just been a while since you updated your computer and you're looking for a new Mac. And so that's what this episode is all about. My name is Luke Clayton, and welcome to the Must Increase podcast. Hey, welcome back to the Must Increase podcast. Really glad to have you join me today. So in the previous episode, we did kind of a live recap of the keynote for Apple's 2023 WWDC event. And so this content is maybe not fully contingent upon if you heard that episode or not, but if you didn't, you might want to go back and check it out because I'm not going to go into as much maybe detail about some of the new products as or today as I did in that episode, so you may want to go check that one out. But today we're doing an update. I do this once or twice a year, kind of letting you know, it's kind of a state of the Mac type of episode in which whenever they release new Macs, which they did last week, I want to kind of let you know if you're in the market for a new one or thinking about buying a new computer, what might be the best approach for you. And so what we're going to do is kind of what we always do. And if you're not watching, this would be the type of episode that you want to make sure you watch. I do include the link to our YouTube channel in the show notes. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify or some podcatcher of choice, you're going to find a link in the show notes to our YouTube channel. If you don't feel like pulling up those show notes, because let's be honest, how often do you actually do that? Then it's easy. Just go to youtube.com/mustincrease. That's youtube.com/mustincrease and find this episode, and you can watch it because this is going to be visual. Could be one of those ones if you're listening. I'm going to do my best to describe it using audio, but definitely the visual is going to come in handy for this episode. So let's hop over here to Apple's website, and I'm already on the Compare Mac Models page. Now, by default, it's pulling up these three Macs: the MacBook Air 13-inch M2, the MacBook Air 15-inch M2, and the MacBook Pro 13-inch M2. So let me just stop and rant. This little guy right here, which if you're not watching, I'll tell you which one. The MacBook Pro 13-inch. I detest that this product is still in Apple's lineup. Now, don't get me wrong, the MacBook Pro is an amazing machine if you get the 14 or 16-inch model. The 13-inch MacBook Pro is outdated. It is not truly a Pro. I've gone off on this so many times in the past, and Apple they must not be subscribed to the podcast because they have clearly not heard my thoughts. Because if they did, they'd totally get rid of this piece of garbage, this totally crappy device from their lineup. I don't really understand the role it even fills anymore, but here it is nonetheless. So we're going to avoid this one. Do not buy the MacBook Pro 13-inch. Now, if you want to let's go down here to the 14-inch. Yes, love it. But the 13-inch, no. Stay away from the MacBook Pro 13-inch. And my reasons are because this is not a true Pro. It uses the same chip, the same M2 chip that you find in the Air. And literally the difference is that it has a fan and it has a touch bar. But who the heck gives a crap about the touch bar anymore? Not me. The touch bar is a total waste. So anyways, I don't need to rant on any longer. All that to say, we're going to avoid this one. So for sake of illustration, let's start with all the Air lineup here. So, okay, we got the 15-inch MacBook Air, the 13-inch, no, not the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Let's do the 13-inch MacBook Air. Let's do the M2, the 13-inch MacBook Air M2 here and the M1 there. Okay, so this is going to compare the entire MacBook Air lineup. So let's do that first. Now this is a first for Apple to do a 15-inch MacBook Air. I love the idea of this. I've had the 13-inch MacBook Air now for a little under a year. I really do like it. I like the portability of it. It's small, it's thin, and it's surprisingly capable. And so, because it's kind of the way that we function here, I actually do have two laptops, and the reason being is because one of those laptops is kind of a floater. It floats back between me and my producer, Bo, who is the editor and producer of these episodes, and it kind of floats back and forth between the two of us depending on which one's doing more editing work. And as of late, I've had a lot of editing and production work for him, and so it kind of he's been using our Pro, and so my more personal computer is actually was this one, the MacBook Air 13-inch. But I will go ahead and tell you, I upgraded. I have not got it yet. At time of release of this episode, I may be close to having it, and so I may do a follow-up with a review after I get my hands on it. But it really, I mean, let's be honest. The only difference between it is really the screen size. That's it. But I just love the idea of having a slightly bigger screen in this thin form factor. And so if we go down the list here and we just compare these side by side, you're going to see that, okay, again, the 13-inch M2, the 15-inch M2 are literally the same with the exception of the screen size. That is the only improvement. Everything else is the same. I actually am surprised that the battery life isn't a little bit better on the 15-inch because, you know, it's a bigger screen, a bigger casing, usually allows more bigger batteries. So that is kind of surprising, but, you know, not a big, because literally, these, I will go to my coffee shop of choice in the morning to work with my 13-inch MacBook, and I will sit there, and I could sit there for hours. I've sat there for 6 hours at a time, and I've still had 40, maybe 50% battery left. The battery on these things are amazing, so I'm not really concerned about that. So as we go down the list there, you can see that, you know, again, we look at these, the 13-inch M2 and the 15-inch M2, there is no difference with the exception of the actual screen size. And of course the pixels, you know, and all that stuff is going to be different, but I mean everything, and then of course the actual size of the device itself, everything else is exactly the same. And so that is the difference there. So now that we kind of realize that the biggest difference between this is of course size and of course price, because we get $10.99, this starts at $12.99. Let's bring this 13-inch into 13-inch M1 into the equation. Now look, this is still a great computer. This is now there's no way it's going to stick around longer than this year. So after this year, I guess we'll technically have to call it outdated, which it is already using, you know, the M1 chip. But the M1 chip was this version of the MacBook came out in 2020, and so yeah, it's already getting old. But look, I was actually just talking to somebody the other day. I was like, hey, you know, what are you going to use this for? And they gave me an idea, and I was like, look, this 13-inch MacBook Air, it's going to be more than enough for you. The M1, it's going to be fantastic, and so it's still a solid machine. Again, it's got a lot of the same specs as this. It's a 7-core GPU, whereas these have a 10-core. But you know, hey, we've got the 13, slightly smaller display, of course, the M1 chip, and then yeah, there's a few things that are different because of the chip that make it different. Memory-wise, so the RAM, you actually can go up to 24 gigs of RAM with the M2, which is nice. I did do that for my 15-inch because I was using the 8 gig model, and honestly, it was fine most of the time, but sometimes it would get a little sluggish with the type of work that I'm doing. So, man, once I get this 24 gig version on the M2, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be set. But you are allowed to configure it up to 24 gigs there. Storage is going to be the same. Display slightly different. This is a wet retina display versus a liquid retina display. I should know what that means. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the liquid retina is slightly better. And let's see, the size and weight. You can see all that stuff. Camera, that is something to note. The front-facing camera on the M2 models is a 1080, whereas it's just a 720. Again, probably not a deal breaker for most people. So which one should you get? Well, really, I think it comes down to a question for the average person. It really is a question of screen size. If you want the bigger screen, this is the first time in a long time, maybe ever, that Apple has allowed you to get this bigger screen. Apple's allowed you to get a non-Pro model in a configuration larger rather than 13 inches. So that is nice. So it really, I think it's going to come down to screen size. And then the other question is going to be, okay, do I want to? How concerned are you about your computer becoming outdated in terms of how quickly? Because again, this MacBook Air M1 model, that did come out in 2020. And so, it's basically 3 years old now. The fall 2020 is released, so it's just about 3 years old. And so, its when it becomes obsolete is obviously going to be a couple years quicker than when one of the M2 models becomes obsolete. So that's something to keep in mind, but I don't think it's a big deal. So for the average consumer, for someone like me, yeah, it definitely matters. Like I want something that is going to stay up to date, everything. I mean, I'm buying and selling computers way more often than most people anyways, so I always do want the latest and greatest. But for the average consumer, yeah, it's going to come down to screen size and, of course, then budget. So, I mean, $999 versus $1299, that's really up to you. And I will say this too, and this is a little bit of a backtrack of what I said in the past. For any of these models, especially the M2s, you are more than fine to stick with the standard configuration of 8 gigs of memory. Now, even on the storage, if you've got good cloud storage, like if you're paying for maybe some type of iCloud Plus storage, you may even be good with a 256. I did go with a 512 on this configuration just because I like the idea of having, twice the storage. A terabyte, 2 terabytes, man, I don't know. If you're needing that much storage, that's a good indication that you probably need, you're probably doing a lot of video, maybe Photoshop work. So you might need a Pro model, which we'll get there here in just a minute. So anyways, yeah, so that is going to be that we're going to look, that's the Air. So if you're in the market, again, looking for these, a new computer, and you want kind of the thinner, more affordable computer, this is where we're gonna check out the MacBook Air lineup. Like I said, it comes down to budget, it comes down to size. Do you want to pay the extra? In this case, I mean, it's upwards of $300 extra if you want the 15-inch size. For me, that's worth it, but that's up to you. Now, let's do another comparison here. Let's bump up to the Pro model. And for the Pro model, I'm going to compare, because there's the only two that you should be getting. Remember, we're avoiding this piece of crap MacBook Pro 13-inch. No, we don't want that. If you buy that, and I find out, I will find you. And we'll leave it at that. But the MacBook 14-inch and the MacBook Pro 16-inch. Now, I'm going to leave the MacBook Air 15-inch as the comparison here, just so we get because whether it was that or the 13-inch, it doesn't matter. That is that's the same specs in terms of power and performance. So I really mainly want to be able to compare the difference between performance here and performance on these two machines, the MacBook Pro. So yeah, let's look at obviously screen size. We've already kind of discussed that. Now here, this is the kicker. I mean, this is what makes them Pro models versus there's this just being an Air. The Air is using the M2, very capable chip for the average user. But these Pros are using the M2 Pro or the M2 Max, which are just insane, beastly machines. I mean, you can just get an idea. I mean, even if you don't understand what this is exactly, the numbers don't lie. I mean, we're looking at 10 core, then up to 38 core, 8 core to 12 core. When it comes to the memory, the RAM, you can max out at 24 gigs on the Air model, but man, you can go up to 96 gigs of memory on the Pros. Storage wise, yeah, I mean, up to 8 terabytes, and even the battery on the 16-inch Pro, that's impressive. I've not, the MacBook Pro that I have, that's our company MacBook Pro, it's actually still using the M1 chip. Believe me, not a big loss. They're still amazing machines. But in fact, that's probably the comparison I should be making too here in a moment. I'll jump to that here in a second. But the battery life here, man, that is impressive. 22 hours, and that is where the bigger screen allows for a bigger overall casing in the laptop, and then it's so it allows more battery. More battery life. And yeah, I'm not going to go through all the specifics of the performance. Just know anything with an M1, M2, or even an M1 Pro Max Ultra, these are just incredibly fast, incredibly powerful, high performance machines. Display, I will say, this Liquid Retina XDR display is something else. When I go from actually using, maybe it is my turn to use the MacBook Pro for whatever reason, and I go from the screen on the MacBook Air to that, oh, you can see the difference. You wouldn't think you could, but it is. It is a beautiful screen on these MacBook Pro devices, on the real MacBook Pros. Size and weight, obviously, these are going to be heavier, but it is interesting. Of course, I guess that's the 15-inch. So the 15-inch, that is interesting. The 15-inch MacBook Air weighs less than the 14-inch MacBook Pro, which makes sense. Let's see what we're looking at weight-wise there. I mean, yeah, so you got it's an extra half pound if you went with one of the 13-inch models here. I just want to look at this one just for. Oh wait, sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. I was looking at the insult of a MacBook Air. Let's try that again. Yeah, so the MacBook Air. Oh yeah, 2.7 pounds. So I mean, look, you're nearly a pound different. 2.8 pounds on the M1 version. So anyways, obviously that's going to be a big factor to consider as well, is of course the size and the weight. I mean, if you're carrying this around, in a backpack or just however it may be. I mean, yeah, 4.7 pounds. That's a hefty beast of a machine right there in terms of size on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. All right, so these other things I'm really not going to get. Oh yeah, okay. It is worthy to note the MacBook Pro models. The true MacBook Pro, the 14 and the 16-inch, they do have built-in HDMI ports and SD card slots. And they have 3 Thunderbolt ports as opposed to the MacBook Air, which only has 2. So if connectivity is important to you in terms of being able to physically plug in, like a screen, an external monitor via HDMI, for example, or be able to plug an SD card slot into your computer, the 14-inch Pro, 16-inch Pro has those capabilities. So that is actually noteworthy. I think everything else, though, we truly can, just kind of, very small differences. And so, yeah. Now, what was the other thing I wanted to touch on here while we're here? Yeah. So when it comes to the MacBook Pro, I wanted to do a comparison to, let's see, does it let me? Yes. So let's take a look at the MacBook Pro 14-inch with the M1, which is the model that I have. Okay, so you do see that there's a slight difference in, this is only a 10-core, 32-core, GPU on the previous model, M1 Pro. Up to 64 gigs of memory instead of 96, which is what the latest MacBook Pro 14 and 16-inch allow. And then, battery life is a little bit less. And you could look at all the specifics here. And so, yeah, it is a difference. And so, but I will tell you this. I have, again, the 14-inch MacBook Pro on the M1 Max with 64 gigs of memory and a 1 terabyte storage. I as much as, hey, I love the latest and greatest, there is no reason for me to upgrade. And so I'm telling you that because if you're able to find a used or refurbished MacBook Pro 14 or 16-inch with the M1 series of chips, you are going to get still a very capable machine that is more than capable to do video editing, After Effects work, motion graphics work, advanced Photoshop work, which is really the only reason you would need this. You're going to be more than capable, or rather, that computer is still going to be more than capable. Because if you look at the starting price on these, look at this. Of course, they're not advertising on Apple's website the M1 Pro price anymore. But if you look at even if you want the 14-inch M2 Pro model, you're starting at $2,000. And I will tell you this. I'm like, look, if you're going to go the true MacBook Pro route, you very likely aren't going to be happy with the base model. Because the base model, let's just take a look here just to confirm that. But the base model on, for example, the 14 and the 16-inch MacBook Pro, you're looking at 16 gigs of memory. That's not very pro to me. And so I'm thinking you're going to want at least 32 gigs of memory. And then, yes, you are at I think I selected the wrong option here. Or no, it looks like, is it a minimum of a terabyte? Maybe it was. For those of you that are paying better attention to what's actually on my screen than I was. But anyways, so, all that to say, you're going to be, again, let's say I get the 14-inch Pro. Yeah, let me just make sure I selected the right one. I select this and I go here to, okay, Apple. Okay. So 32 gigs of memory. Yeah. So a terabyte storage is your minimum there. So you're going to be happy with that. That is new. That's what I was confused. When I got my M1 Max model of the 14-inch Pro, 512 was the base, and I had to pay a little bit to upgrade to the 1 terabyte. So anyways, that's my clarification there. For those of you that are listening, you're super confused because you're not watching this episode. Anyways, all this to say, if you're going to get the 14 or 16-inch MacBook Pro, I would highly recommend upgrading at least to 32 gigs of memory, which is a $400 increase. But again, if you're already in this price range, that's not expanding your budget too much. So that is what I recommend in terms of the MacBook Pro. Now, there's one more kind of department, if you will, to take a look at, and that's going to be the desktop Macs. And so let's hop over here to Mac. Let's go back to our, where did it go? Yeah, compare. Nope. Here we go. Compare Mac. All right. This time I want to compare the desktops. So now, actually, just now realizing this, there was no announcement about a new iMac at this past WWDC, which some might have expected. So I'd imagine we're going to see that in the fall. And so let's look. What's going to be the best comparison here? Now, I'm going to take the Mac Pro off the table. If there is one of you out there who truly thinks you need a Mac Pro, and by truly needs, it means you have at least $7,000 to spend on a computer, I want to talk to you. I genuinely want to meet you. I want to be your friend. I want you to co-host this podcast with me because you are the freaking man or woman. Because this is a incredible machine. And I just don't see why anybody out there needs it unless you are, really just either rolling in the dough and or like doing some crazy high-end, processing, video editing, like you're working for Disney. That's crazy stuff. So anyways, so we're going to rule that one out. So instead, let's do this. Let's look at the iMac. Okay. Let's look at the Mac Mini. And let's look at the Mac Studio, because I would argue that many people don't even need the Mac Studio, especially with the capabilities of the Mac Mini nowadays. iMac is going to be your kind of best solution in terms of an all-in-one because it does have the screen built in. So you'll notice that right away. In fact, I should probably swap these two just so the pricing tiers up properly as far as visually. So yeah, let's just swap these two. So because you'll notice the iMac, the iMac has a built-in screen, so that's going to make it obviously a little bit more expensive than the Mac Mini because it's got the screen. So it's got a nice screen built in. Of course, the thing about the iMac right now, though, is they have not updated it with the M2, so it's still running on the M1, and that's all good and well. Again, very capable system there. But my concern is, that came out in I think spring of 2021 is when this iMac came out. And so, it might get outdated a little bit quicker. In terms of, down the road, it probably has a couple years less in terms of being supported by Apple than maybe the Studio or the Mac Mini do. So that is something to keep in mind. And as we look at all the comparison factors, I'm not going to go through everything again because we're really just talking the difference between the different generations and types of chips. Now, let me swap the position of these two back actually now that I'm talking through it because this makes a little more sense. So the Mac Mini, iMac. The iMac is basically a bigger version, non-portable version of the MacBook Air 13-inch. Remember that one? This one right here, the M1 series. It's got literally almost the exact same capabilities and capacities as the MacBook Air M1. And so really, it just comes down to, do you want a desktop computer? And if you do you want to be, do you want to have the screen already built in? And it's a 24-inch screen, so it's a good size screen and all that. The iMac is cool and all. I don't know. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around that, people having much of a market anymore. And that's probably why they don't update it that often. because, you know, if I want something with a built-in screen, even though it's smaller, like I'm just going to get a laptop, you know. If I want a desktop, then why would I limit myself to the capabilities or to the just built-in screen? You know, that's why I would prefer, if I'm going desktop, which I have gotten a desktop a couple times in the past. I prefer a Mac Mini because, you know, you can buy an external screen. You can buy a nice, like, high def or even 4K external screen for maybe $200 to $300. Well, I mean, do the math on that. Like, that's still cheaper than buying an iMac, and you're in the same exact position. You're confined to your desk, which is fine. You bought a desktop, you know that. You knew what you're getting into. And so I don't know. I'd be like, hey, let's look into getting a Mac Mini and maybe use that little bit of extra budget that we'd have. Because, like, let's set aside $300 for a really nice, you know, screen. Okay. So now our total is going to be $899. Well, now I've still got what's that, like $300 or wait, is that $400? That's $400 of wiggle room to maybe beef up my Mac Mini a little bit. So that's the route I would go. So before we talk about the Mac Mini, though, let's talk about the Mac Studio. The Mac Studio is going to really appeal to, and it's hard for me to even make the argument that you need this. Again, you're not as cool as the Mac Pro guy, but I still want to meet you if you really think you need a Mac Studio. Now, I will say this. If you are in live streaming and you're looking for something to actually do encoding on the computer itself, maybe a Mac Studio is there, but I don't know. The M2 Pro might still be sufficient. I do know for church leaders out there, ProPresenter is a resource-intensive machine. That's typically where it runs maybe your screens and your in-house graphics. And so, you know, the Mac Studio may be necessary. I don't know enough about that software in particular as far as its requirements and so forth. And so maybe that would be the application, but I don't know. Other than that, I don't know, because this Mac Mini is really impressive. And I'm actually I'm glad that they did, but I'm halfway surprised they added the M2 Pro capabilities to this Mac Mini. So that's where I'm gonna spend kind of the rest of our time here, is kind of building out a Mac Mini that maybe is more ideal for you. So I'm gonna start with the base model and kind of work my way up. Now, again, same thing as before, like the 8 gigs with an M2 chip, the 8 gigs of memory, and the 256 gigs of storage. Maybe I want to up that to 512. But with it being a desktop, I can also consider, like, if I need more storage, I can buy a little, solid state external drive, plug that in and I can buy probably a terabyte of solid state storage externally, cheaper than an extra $200 here. So that's something to keep in mind as well, instead of buying more built-in storage. So this would be the absolute, like, minimal, whatever. And this is the cheapest way to go. Like I said, you do this, maybe you've already got a screen. Hey, you're only out $600 plus tax. And if you put another $200 to $300 aside for a screen, hey, that's a pretty good Mac setup if you're cool with being confined to your desktop. But let's look at the actual M2 Pro versions. Now, these are going to start at $1299. That's obviously a little bit more. That's actually double the price of just the regular M2 chip Mac Mini. But look at this. I mean, I can go up to 32 gigs of storage. I can even upgrade my M2, the actual chip itself, to have more capability. I can upgrade all the way to 8 terabytes of storage if I wanted to. The minimum on the storage is going to be 512. And so let's not even upgrade our chip. Let's just upgrade to 32 gigs of memory and 512 of SD of solid state storage. Man, look at this. This is a pro level machine, $1,700. Now, hey, look, I know that some people still choke on a number like that, but if you really think about it, for a pro level machine, especially if you've already got a computer or already got a screen, like that's really, really, that's a really pretty good deal to have a pro level Mac. Again, desktop, yeah, but yeah, so that's where I'm looking at in terms of a desktop. I'm looking at one of these Mac Minis, and again, if do you need the Pro? Yeah, well, you know your needs. Again, video editor, heavy Photoshop work, even heavy web development, anything that if you're doing live stream or running any type of intensive software, yeah, you probably do want to consider the M2 Pro chip in this Mac Mini. But even if you're just keeping it basic with, even light Photoshop, Canva, man, Canva is awesome in terms of, I got an episode, we actually have an episode talking more about that coming out here later. I think you're really going to enjoy, I mean, with tools like Canva, you just don't need, because that, like we explained in that episode, Canva is a web-based platform. So all of that, kind of high-end stuff that Photoshop uses your computer to do, it's being done on Canva server. So as long as you have a strong internet connection, you're good. So that's a little bit of a rabbit that I'll chase in a future episode. But anyways, this is what I'd look at if I'm looking for a desktop. I'd probably go with one of the Mac Minis, either the M2 or the M Pro. If you really want to go crazy, the Ultra or the M2 or the Studio rather, then that's cool too. I'm more power to you. And again, if you want to get the Mac Pro, hey, I want to be your friend. Seriously, reach out to me. All right, so that really is the recap of, kind of like where the Macs are now, what I think you should get based on kind of what's available now. Again, I'm going to push most people towards the MacBook Air. I'm gonna probably say get the 13, if the screen size doesn't matter, 13-inch M2 MacBook Air. That's a good safe bet. I know it's a little bit more than the M1, but I'm going to say go ahead and get that one because what that means is you're going to, again, it's just, there's about a 1.5 year difference between when those were released. And so it just kind of keeps it relevant, supported by Apple a little bit longer, a little more longevity there. But even if you did go with the M1 version of the MacBook Air, which again, I know people that have, and I know that they've done it recently. I have nothing against it. I think it's great and more power to them. And I think they're still going to be very happy because most people, they just need a simple computer to do some of the basic stuff. But if you're a pro, do not get the MacBook 13-inch MacBook Pro. Do not get that. That is a piece of crap. I cannot say it enough. It should be called the Crapbook Pro because it's a piece of garbage and it's an insult to Apple, or insult to our intelligence rather, that Apple would continue to advertise this as a pro machine. So stay away from that one. But all about the 14-inch MacBook Pro, the 16-inch MacBook Pro if you're looking for something bigger screen, more capacity in terms of performance and all that. And then, yeah, the Mac Mini, if you're going desktop, I'd go Mac Mini again. Maybe buy yourself a little screen if you don't already have one. And, Mac Studio, Mac Pro, man, you're really cool if you think you need one of those. And seriously, love to have you on to talk more about that. All right. Well, hey, I want to thank you for joining me for this episode. I really do hope this content's helpful. And if it is, I don't ask for this very often, but it really would mean a lot if you'd leave a 5-star review and, maybe just share the podcast with your friends. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Again, you can go to youtube.com/mustincrease. That's youtube.com/mustincrease to subscribe on YouTube. And we're also available wherever you listen to podcasts. So follow us on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, all the Google Podcasts, whatever it's called nowadays, all the different places. And of course, if you want to connect with me and learn more about what we do and what we offer in terms of what we do for churches and businesses and families and so forth, just go to mustincrease.com. You'll learn more about it there and you can get in touch with me there as well. And I'd love to hear from you. Seriously, I will make a plug for that too. I'd love to hear what you'd like future episodes to be about. Your feedback is very welcome. In fact, many times that's how I determine what these episodes are going to be about, is when I get feedback from a user, whether they leave a comment on YouTube or send me an email or reach out to the website. I'd love to hear from you. That would be awesome. Well, thanks again so much for joining me for this episode as we continue to increase truth and inspire hope right here on the Must Increase podcast.